The News Nation special had been billed as a no-holds-barred discussion on media bias and political accountability, with Bill O'Reilly brought out of semi-retirement for what the network clearly hoped would be a ratings juggernaut. O'Reilly sat at the debate table with the satisfied posture of someone who had spent decades dominating cable news, his positioning deliberate, his body language radiating the casual authority of a man who had made a career out of talking over people and calling it debate. The format was structured as a town hall with a live studio audience, but the real draw was the one-on-one segment where O'Reilly would face off against a Democratic politician of the network's choosing. When Representative Jasmine Crockett walked onto the set carrying a laptop and a folder, O'Reilly's expression shifted into something between amusement and anticipation. He had built his brand on dismantling unprepared liberals on live television, and he clearly expected this to be another such occasion. The host, Dan Abrams, outlined the ground rules: 10 minutes of direct debate on the topic of whether Democrats had weaponized government institutions against conservatives. O'Reilly would argue the affirmative. Crockett would argue the negative. The audience would ask follow-up questions. Before Abrams could finish the introduction, O'Reilly jumped in. Dan, before we start, I just want to say that I appreciate Representative Crockett coming on the show. It takes courage for a Democrat to face actual scrutiny instead of the softball interviews they get on MSNBC. So let's have a real conversation here. His tone was patronizing, the verbal equivalent of patting her on the head. Crockett smiled pleasantly and opened her laptop. I appreciate that, Mr. O'Reilly. I'm looking forward to a fact-based discussion. O'Reilly launched into his opening argument with the practiced rhythm of someone who had delivered variations of it thousands of times. The FBI had been weaponized against conservatives. The IRS had targeted Tea Party groups. The DOJ had created a two-tiered justice system where Democrats walked free while Republicans faced prosecution. Social media companies working with government had censored conservative voices. Every institution had been corrupted by partisan bias. He delivered it with absolute confidence, his voice rising and falling in the theatrical cadence that had made him a cable news icon. When he finished, Abrams turned to Crockett for her response. She looked down at her laptop screen, then up at O'Reilly. Mr. O'Reilly, you just made 4 specific claims. I'd like to address each one with data. Let's start with the FBI being weaponized against conservatives. This is FBI prosecution data from, O'Reilly interrupted. Oh, here we go. More statistics taken out of context. Representative, I've been doing this for 40 years. I know how people manipulate numbers to, Crockett continued calmly. The data shows that federal prosecutions of elected officials over the past decade are almost perfectly balanced by party. If you'll let me finish, O'Reilly talked over her. I don't need a civics lesson from someone who's been in Congress for 5 minutes. The American people can see what's happening with their own eyes. Crockett turned her laptop screen toward the camera. On it was a spreadsheet with federal prosecution data color-coded by party affiliation, with totals at the bottom showing 287 Democratic officials prosecuted and 291 Republican officials prosecuted between 2014 and 2024. Mr. O'Reilly, this is Department of Justice data, public record. It shows almost perfect balance in prosecutions across party lines. If the FBI is weaponized against conservatives, why are Democrats being prosecuted at the same rate? O'Reilly waved his hand dismissively. Those numbers are meaningless without context. What matters is the high-profile cases. Trump was indicted 4 times. Biden was never indicted. That tells you everything you need to know. Crockett nodded slowly. Let's talk about high-profile cases then. She pulled up a new screen on her laptop. This is a list of sitting or former presidents and vice presidents who face federal investigation or prosecution in the past 50 years. Richard Nixon, Republican, Watergate. Spiro Agnew, Republican, bribery and tax evasion. Bill Clinton, Democrat, perjury investigation. Donald Trump, Republican, 4 indictments. The score is 3 Republicans, 1 Democrat. If anything, the pattern suggests Republicans in executive positions are more likely to face investigation, not less. O'Reilly's face flushed. You're cherry-picking again. What about Hunter Biden? He committed multiple felonies, and the DOJ protected him for years. Crockett pulled up another screen. Hunter Biden was indicted in September 2023 on federal gun charges and again in December 2023 on tax charges. He's currently facing trial. So he wasn't protected. He was prosecuted. What's your evidence that he was protected? O'Reilly leaned back, his voice taking on the lecturing tone that had defined his Fox News career. Representative, you're very good at pulling up charts and numbers, but you're missing the bigger picture here. The American people don't trust these institutions anymore because they can see the bias with their own eyes. You can throw statistics at me all day, But it doesn't change what people know to be true. Crockett's expression didn't change. Mr. O'Reilly, what you're saying is that feelings matter more than facts. That if people believe something strongly enough, the actual evidence doesn't matter. Is that your position? O'Reilly's jaw tightened. I'm saying that your so-called facts are selective and don't tell the whole story. Crockett turned her laptop toward the camera again. Then let's tell the whole story. This is IRS audit data from 2010 to 2013, the period you mentioned regarding Tea Party targeting. The IRS flagged 298 conservative groups for additional scrutiny. They also flagged two progressive groups. More liberal groups were flagged than conservative groups. The Inspector General report you're probably referencing focused only on the conservative groups and didn't examine the progressive groups, which is why the narrative became one-sided. But the actual data shows the IRS was flagging both sides. O'Reilly shook his head. That's revisionist history. The IRS admitted they targeted conservatives. Lois Lerner took the fifth rather than testify. Crockett pulled up another screen. Lois Lerner invoked her Fifth Amendment rights, which is her constitutional right and doesn't constitute evidence of wrongdoing. The subsequent investigation by the FBI found no criminal activity. The investigation by the Treasury Inspector General found that both conservative and progressive groups were being flagged. These are the findings. If you have evidence that contradicts them, I'd like to see it. O'Reilly stood up, a dramatic move clearly calculated to establish dominance. You know what your problem is, Representative? You think because you can pull up some spreadsheets and government reports, you're winning an argument. But you're not addressing the fundamental corruption that Americans see every day. Crockett remained seated, which made O'Reilly's standing feel performative rather than powerful. Mr. O'Reilly, you've now dismissed my evidence 4 times. FBI prosecution data, IRS flagging data, Hunter Biden indictment, and historical investigation patterns. Each time you've said the data is selective, misleading, or doesn't capture what people feel, but you haven't provided a single piece of counter evidence. Not one statistic, not one document, not one fact that contradicts what I've shown. You're asking people to trust your feelings over documented evidence. She turned her laptop screen again. Let's move to your claim about social media censorship. This is a graph from New York University's Center for Social Media and Politics showing content removal rates on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube from 2020 to 2023, before and after various ownership and policy changes. Conservative content was removed at a rate of 0.047%. Liberal content was removed at 0.051%. The difference is statistically insignificant. Both sides had content removed at essentially the same rate. O'Reilly's voice rose. Those numbers are completely... Look, I don't know where you're getting this data from, but anyone who was on Twitter before Elon Musk bought it knows that conservatives were being shadow banned and censored constantly. Crockett's tone remained patient. Mr. O'Reilly, you just said you don't know where I'm getting this data from. I told you. New York University's Center for Social Media and Politics. It's one of the leading academic research centers on this exact topic. They analyze millions of posts across platforms. But you're dismissing their peer-reviewed research because it contradicts your personal experience? O'Reilly sat back down, clearly frustrated. I'm dismissing it because I don't trust academic research from liberal universities. They have an agenda. Crockett paused, letting that statement hang in the air. So to be clear, you don't trust the Department of Justice data. You don't trust the IRS data. You don't trust the FBI findings. You don't trust academic research from major universities. You only trust what aligns with your pre-existing beliefs. And you're accusing others of bias? The audience stirred. Abrams tried to jump in, but O'Reilly was already talking. I trust common sense, Representative. I trust what I can see with my own eyes. I trust the experiences of millions of Americans who feel like their institutions have been turned against them. Crockett turned her laptop toward him this time, not the camera. Mr. O'Reilly, I want to show you something specific. This is your own Twitter account? I pulled your tweets from the past year. You've posted 847 times. Your tweets have been viewed over 42 million times collectively. None of them have been removed. None of them have been shadow banned. Your engagement rates are consistent with accounts of similar size. You personally have not been censored. So when you talk about conservative censorship, you're not even describing your own experience. You're describing a narrative. O'Reilly's face went from flushed to pale. You pulled my Twitter data? That's invasive and inappropriate. Crockett's expression didn't change. It's public data, Mr. O'Reilly. Everything I'm showing you is information you posted publicly. But I notice you're objecting to me analyzing your data rather than addressing what the data shows, which is that you haven't been censored. O'Reilly stood again, his voice sharp. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You sit there with your laptop and your charts and you think you're being objective, but you're just another partisan hack using selective data to Crockett interrupted for the first time. Mr. O'Reilly, you've now dismissed my evidence 6 times. FBI prosecution data dismissed. IRS targeting data dismissed. Social media research dismissed. Hunter Biden indictment dismissed. Historical investigation patterns dismissed. Your own Twitter analytics dismissed. At what point do you acknowledge that maybe the problem isn't that all the data is biased, but that the data contradicts your narrative? O'Reilly pointed at her. I've been in journalism for 4 decades. I know propaganda when I see it. And what you're doing right now is propaganda dressed up as fact-checking. Crockett pulled up another screen. Let's talk about your journalism then. Mr. O'Reilly, this is a compilation of fact checks of the O'Reilly factor from 2010 to 2017 when you were still on Fox News. PolitiFact rated 37 of your statements. 22 were rated false or pants on fire. 11 were mostly false or half true. 4 were mostly true. 0 were rated true. Your own journalistic track record shows a 59% rate of making false statements. And you're lecturing me about propaganda? The studio went completely silent. O'Reilly stared at the screen, his mouth slightly open. 10 seconds. 15. Abrams looked like he wanted to intervene but couldn't figure out how. 20 seconds. Finally, O'Reilly found his voice, and it was different now, smaller, defensive. Those fact-checkers are biased liberal organizations. Everyone knows that. Crockett nodded slowly. So that's 7 dismissals. FBI data, IRS data, academic research, your own Twitter analytics, historical patterns, Hunter Biden indictment, and now independent fact-checkers. You've dismissed 7 different sources of evidence because they all contradict your claims. Mr. O'Reilly, at what point does this stop being about biased sources and start being about you refusing to accept any evidence that challenges your worldview? She turned her laptop toward the audience. I want to show you one more thing. This is a media bias fact-check analysis of news sources. It rates media outlets on their factual reporting and political bias. I'm going to show you where your current podcast ranks. She pulled up the rating. The No Spin News, your current show, is rated as having mixed factual reporting and a right-wing bias. For comparison, I'm pulling up ratings for sources across the spectrum. She showed the screen. NPR, high factual reporting, slight left bias. Wall Street Journal, high factual reporting, slight right bias. MSNBC, mixed factual reporting, left bias. Fox News, mixed factual reporting, right bias. Your show, mixed factual reporting, right-wing bias. You're not an objective journalist, Mr. O'Reilly. You're a partisan commentator with a documented history of making false statements. And you're sitting here dismissing documented evidence as propaganda while asking people to trust your unsupported claims instead. O'Reilly's hands were shaking now. This is unbelievable. You came here with a laptop full of opposition research to ambush me instead of having an honest debate. Crockett's response was immediate and devastating. Mr. O'Reilly, you're the one who said I should face actual scrutiny instead of softball interviews. I prepared for that scrutiny by bringing documented evidence for every claim I plan to make. You prepared by assuming you could dismiss anything I said by calling it biased. That's not an ambush. That's the difference between someone who does their homework and someone who's gotten used to not being challenged. She pulled up one final screen. But let's talk about ambush journalism since you brought it up. This is a compilation of segments from the O'Reilly Factor where you sent producers to ambush people at their homes or offices with cameras. Ambush interviews, you called them. You did 127 of these segments over the course of your show. You built a brand on confronting people with cameras when they weren't prepared. So I find it fascinating that you're now objecting to someone coming prepared with evidence to a debate you agreed to have. O'Reilly stood for the 3rd time, and this time he started removing his microphone. I'm not going to sit here and be lectured by someone who's been in politics for 5 minutes about journalistic ethics when I've been doing this since before she was born. Crockett remained seated, her voice calm. Mr. O'Reilly, I'm 38 years old. You were already at Fox News when I was born. You've been doing this for decades. And in those decades, you've built a career on dismissing evidence you don't like, making false statements that get fact-checked, and attacking anyone who challenges you. The only difference today is that I came with receipts you can't dismiss because they're not opinions. They're your own Twitter data, your own fact-check history, official government statistics, peer-reviewed research. You're not leaving because I'm being unfair. You're leaving because I'm being thorough. O'Reilly's microphone was off now, but his voice was loud enough to carry without it. This segment is over. I don't debate with people who come armed with partisan talking points instead of... Crockett turned her laptop screen toward the camera one final time. Mr. O'Reilly has dismissed evidence 8 times in 10 minutes. He's called FBI data biased, IRS data selective, academic research untrustworthy, independent fact checkers partisan, and his own Twitter analytics invasive. He's objected to every single source I've cited without providing a single countersource of his own. And now he's leaving because he can't defend his claims when confronted with documented evidence. She looked directly at O'Reilly. You spent 40 years building a brand on the idea that you tell the truth and liberals lie. But when someone shows up with actual evidence, not opinions, not feelings, but data from government sources and your own public statements, you have no response except to dismiss it all as biased and walk away. That tells viewers everything they need to know about whether your claims are based in reality or in narrative. O'Reilly stared at her for a long moment, his face cycling through rage and something that looked like recognition that he had been completely outmaneuvered. Then he turned and walked off the set without another word. The studio door slammed behind him with enough force to make the cameras shake slightly. Abrams sat in shocked silence for several seconds before turning to the camera. We seem to have... Well, Mr. O'Reilly has left the segment. Representative Crockett, do you want to respond to his departure? Crockett closed her laptop carefully. Mr. O'Reilly said at the beginning that he appreciated me coming on to face actual scrutiny. I came prepared for that scrutiny with documented evidence. He came prepared to dismiss anything I said without examining it. When that strategy didn't work, when I could show that every piece of data I cited was from official public sources, he had no backup plan except to leave. That's not strength. That's someone who's spent so long in echo chambers where their claims aren't challenged that they've forgotten how to defend them with evidence. She paused. I want to say something to the viewers. You deserve better than political commentary that asks you to ignore evidence and trust feelings. You deserve better than pundits who dismiss facts as biased without providing counterfacts. You deserve better than someone who builds a career on ambushing others with cameras, but calls it an ambush when someone shows up prepared with data. Mr. O'Reilly's entire worldview is built on the idea that mainstream institutions can't be trusted, that data from government sources is manipulated, that academic research is propaganda, and that the only truth comes from him and people like him. But when you actually examine the evidence, when you look at FBI prosecution rates, IRS flagging data, social media content removal rates, his own Twitter analytics, his own fact-check history, the narrative collapses. And rather than acknowledge that, he left. The footage would become legendary within hours. Not just the confrontation, but specifically the laptop screen moments. News outlets ran split-screen comparisons showing Crockett's evidence on one side and O'Reilly's dismissals on the other. Social media users created compilations of all 8 instances where he dismissed documented evidence, each one labeled with what he had called it: biased, selective, untrustworthy, partisan, invasive, propaganda, liberal, agenda-driven. Media critics wrote analysis pieces about how Crockett had essentially performed a real-time fact-check of one of cable news's most famous personalities using nothing but his own statements and public data. Within 24 hours, the clip of O'Reilly saying, "I don't know where you're getting this data from," followed immediately by Crockett saying New York University's Center for Social Media and Politics would have over 15 million views. Within 48 hours, 3 advertisers would pull their sponsorship from O'Reilly's podcast, citing concerns about his willingness to dismiss documented evidence. Within a week, News Nation would quietly cancel plans for a recurring O'Reilly segment that had been in development. But what really ended O'Reilly's credibility wasn't any single moment. It was the laptop screen. The fact that Crockett had brought receipts, literal, visual, on-screen receipts that viewers could see for every claim she made. She didn't ask people to trust her. She showed them the data. She didn't make assertions. She displayed evidence. And when O'Reilly dismissed each piece of evidence, she simply pulled up the next one, creating a visual record of someone refusing to engage with reality. The most viral image from the entire segment was a screenshot of Crockett's laptop showing O'Reilly's own Twitter analytics: 847 posts, 42 million views, 0 removed content, while the closed captioning showed him saying, "Conservatives are being censored." The juxtaposition was devastating. He was claiming censorship, while his own data proved he had a massive, uncensored platform. That single image would be used in media literacy courses, in journalism ethics classes, in political science seminars about the difference between narrative and evidence. In the days following the segment, O'Reilly released a statement calling the debate a setup orchestrated by partisan Democrats and a complicit media, and claiming that Crockett had ambushed him with selectively edited data designed to mislead viewers. The statement was immediately fact-checked by multiple outlets, all of which noted that every piece of data Crockett had shown was from publicly available sources, FBI statistics, IRS reports, academic research published in peer-reviewed journals, Twitter's own analytics, and media bias fact-check ratings. None of it was edited. None of it was selective in the sense of being unrepresentative. It was simply evidence he couldn't refute. Several conservative commentators tried to defend O'Reilly, arguing that Crockett had been unfair by bringing prepared data to an informal debate. But that defense backfired when critics pointed out that O'Reilly had built his entire career on the idea that he was more prepared than his opponents, that he did his homework, that he confronted liberals with facts they couldn't handle. The defense essentially admitted that when someone actually came more prepared than O'Reilly, he couldn't compete. In the end, what destroyed Bill O'Reilly's credibility wasn't Jasmine Crockett's rhetoric or her arguments. It was her laptop screen. The visual evidence that she could back up every single claim with data while he could back up nothing. The split screen showing her sources, Department of Justice, IRS, New York University, PolitiFact, Media Bias Fact Check, Twitter Analytics, next to his responses, biased, selective, untrustworthy, propaganda. I don't know where you're getting this. 10 dismissals. 8 different sources. 0 counter evidence. In a laptop screen that showed in real time that the emperor had no clothes. Bill O'Reilly had built a 40-year career on the premise that he was the truth teller in a world of liberal bias. Jasmine Crockett destroyed that premise in 10 minutes by doing something simple. She showed her work. She brought the receipts. She displayed the evidence. And when he dismissed each piece, she simply showed the next one until the pattern became undeniable. He wasn't dismissing biased sources. He was dismissing any source that contradicted him. He wasn't standing up to propaganda. He was refusing to acknowledge reality. The laptop screen showed it all. And once people saw it, really saw it, with the evidence displayed visually and his dismissals captured on camera, they couldn't unsee it. Bill O'Reilly's credibility didn't just take a hit. It ended. Because Jasmine Crockett had brought receipts he couldn't dismiss, displayed on a screen he couldn't ignore, in a format that made his dismissals look exactly like what they were, a desperate attempt to avoid accountability to facts. 10 dismissals, 1 laptop screen, and a credibility that would never recover.